conferences that you gave, correct?
Yes.
And I want to go through your deposition and follow up on some questions that you were asked. Do you remember in your deposition you were asked about once support was removed, was it your belief that your father would pass? And you indicated, did you not, that you had spoken to Dr. Husel about that? Do you remember that?
I remember speaking with Dr. Husel, yes.
And you said in your deposition, did you not, I said, how long would he be expected to live once we remove the ventilator? And you said in your sworn deposition, quote, it could be seconds, it could be minutes, it could be days or weeks. Do you remember saying that?
Dr. Husel said that.
Do you remember saying that that's what Dr. Husel said when you asked about how long
Yes.
your father would live, right? And then just want to go on to the questions that you were asked about comfort. Because you asked Dr. Husel, as you testified to, whether your father would be in any pain, correct?
Yes, during the extubation.
When the tube was pulled from your father, that was a concern that there might be pain there,
Yes.
correct? And you answered in your deposition that you talked to Dr. Husel about that, and in his answer to that question is he indicated that they would provide him medication so that he would be comfortable.
He just said they would make him comfortable. He didn't say how they were going to do that.
Right, he just said, we'll make him comfortable.
Yes.
Would it surprise you to know that the nurse that gave your father comfort medication, or as I'm sure the state would point out, fentanyl, was actually a male nurse and not a female?
I saw a female nurse inject something. I don't know what she put into his IV.
Okay. And so I ask you this because fair to say that, and I see that you're emotional today, this was a very emotional time for your family, right?
Yes.
And you had just witnessed your father have, I think you saw 2 of the 6 codes that day, is that right?
I saw a total of 3 codes.
So you saw 3 times your father coding, and then efforts being made by nurses and doctors to bring him back to life, to resuscitate him.
Yes.
And those efforts you saw, I know you've mentioned, you saw CPR being given to your father?
Yes.
By male nurses?
It was numerous. Well, I assume they were nurses.
Numerous people, right?
Yes.
Were giving your father chest compressions over a period of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes, right? Upwards of that. And
Yeah, the longest one was, like I said, probably 10 to 15 minutes at the most.
And they were just working on your father, trying to bring him back to life.
Yes.
And I know, and I only ask you these questions because I have to, and I hope you know that. But so you saw 3 of the 6 codes. You were asked on direct about codes and what they mean to you. I know you worked in a hospital, not as a doctor or a nurse, but you're sort of familiar with that general setting. A code, I assume you know, is when someone's heart actually stops working, right? They have an arrest.
I don't know all of what a code means, but that could be part of it.
And when you saw CPR being done on your father for those prolonged periods of time, I'm assuming you knew then that those were efforts to get your father's heart to work so that he could breathe.
I didn't know if it was actually his heart or just his breathing.
Okay. Certainly you knew that it was a dire situation when you're seeing all this.
Oh, yes. Whenever they call it, I believe it's called a code blue.
And I remember in your deposition you talked about just how many people were there during those codes trying to help your father, right? In the room.
There was quite a bit on the last code.
Tell me, upwards of 10 people in the room working on
Yeah,
your father.
that occurred right about their shift change, and I think that's why there were so many staff on hand at that point.
And the codes, the 3 witnessed, and all the codes that you know about that your father experienced, those were all on the emergency room floor. Is that right?
2 of them were the emergency room floor, and the last one was an ICU.
When he was upstairs in the 4th floor.
Yes.
So I want to go back through, if we could, conditions that you mentioned about your father. When he had the toe amputation, he was in Mount Carmel West for a 2-week period, was he not?
Yes.
Because it wasn't just the toe amputation, he also had the bypass in his leg, correct?
Yes, they said they put a stent in.
So the leg had to be cut open and a stent was put in there so that the blood would flow. Is that how you understand?
That's my understanding.
And then after that 2-week stay, I believe you testified that you were the one that took him to the rehab facility because he wasn't able to go straight home.
Correct.
In addition to his smoking history, you know that he had aortic stenosis?
No.
Did you know that he had carotid arteries?
No, I wasn't aware of any medical conditions that he had prior to going to Mount Carmel.
So you didn't know about his history of having a stroke or the fact that he had diabetes? Did you know about either of those things?
No, none of that was apparent.
And obviously you weren't living with your father at this
I wasn't living with him, but I saw him at least once a week.
And certainly you wouldn't have any reason to disagree with the medical conditions or his medical history as it was in his electronic medical record, right?
No, the only medical condition I ever talked to him about was he seemed to be getting glaucoma, and I think it was his left eye.
Well, let's talk about on the 29th and 30th. Fair to say that you had an opportunity to see your dad on those days. He had been hallucinating, had he not?
When he was in the Meadow Grove Nursing Care Facility.
Yes. So in between the 2-week stay that was the multiple surgeries and when he was at the rehab, you noticed that he was hallucinating, did you not?
Well, when he was at Mount Carmel, he was pretty unresponsive, so I wasn't able to assess anything from him. But it wasn't until he got into the nursing facility that he was able to actually set up and talk a little bit. And that's when he told me that, well, my stepmother told me that he had saw cats outside the window, and there were no cats. But he was a cat lover, so that kind of made sense to me, but there was no cats.
And you had those conversations with your stepmother about your father's condition when he was in the rehab facility before the last time he went to Mount Carmel West. Is that right?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. The hallucinations, those were in the rehab facility before the last time he went to Mount Carmel West.
Yes, the rehab facility.
You mentioned what Dr. Husel told you about his condition. And I know that today, on direct, you use the word brain dead, the word, right?
Yeah, he said it was brain damage from the lack of oxygen from the codes that he had, and that he was potentially, brain dead.
And I'm assuming, have you watched some of this trial, sir?
I haven't watched any of it.
I'm assuming that you would agree with me that memory doesn't get better with time.
Mine doesn't.
So let's go back to your deposition in 2021 when you were asked about the conversation with Dr. Husel. Fair to say in 2021, you indicated Dr. Husel approached me and said that my father's vitals were good and that he was most likely, has brain damage, his organs were shutting down, and he would never be himself again because of the lack of oxygen from all the codes. Do you remember that?
It's something to that effect. I mean, I don't know verbatim, but that's the general gist of it.
And certainly while Dr. Husel wasn't present on the day shift when the codes were happening, that's accurate information that your father had multiple codes, right?
Yes, he had multiple codes.
And you knew at that point that his organs were shutting down, did you not?
No, I did not know that.
So tell me, and I know you were asked about your deposition, but have you had a chance to think back about whether you were present for the conversation that Dr. Duffy had with your family, or do you still believe you weren't present for that?
I remember meeting Dr. Duffy, but I don't remember him, other than saying that he was stable. I don't remember any other conversation regarding his health care.
So the conversation, and Dr. Duffy was, do you remember, was an ICU doctor?
Yes, he was in the ICU.
In the day shift?
Yes.
And so any conversation where Dr. Duffy would have spoken to the family, which included the two brothers, do you have one brother?
I have two brothers, but the one lives out of state.
Okay, so it was just you and your brother there and your sister, I believe.
Yes.
So a note from Dr. Duffy that he spoke with the two sons and the daughter and the wife and indicated that the patient...
Your Honor, I would object to anything Dr. Duff being read out in the record like this. It's hearsay.
I'm asking him anything that would indicate that would be not true.
I'll permit it.
So a note indicating that a conversation took place with those individuals and Dr. Duffy, and it was communicated to the family that your father was unlikely to survive. That's not a conversation that you remember.
I don't remember Dr. Duffy saying that.
And do you remember Dr. Comfort having a conversation with the family as well about the grim prognosis of your father?
I don't believe I remember meeting a Dr. Comfort.
Okay. And do you know who Dr. Comfort was?
No, I don't.
Do you remember in your conversation with Dr. Husel sharing with him a personal story about you and or your family having witnessed a bad experience with your grandfather's passing?
My grandfather?
Yes.
Well, both my grandfathers passed away at Mount Carmel West.
Do you remember sharing that with Dr. Husel?
I don't.
And you worked at Mount Carmel West for
I did.
time. And I know we're talking generally about 2 hospital stays here, the 2 weeks and then the final admission. Focusing on the 2-week stay, as I listened to your direct testimony and read your deposition, you did not think the care that was given to your father during that 2 weeks was the care it should have been. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
And certainly that first 2-week admission, the toe and the bypass surgery, Dr. Husel was not involved in any way in the care.
I don't believe he was.
Was your brother in ICU during that 2-week time?
My brother?
I'm sorry, your father, sorry.
Not during the 2 weeks, no.
He was just in the general operating room when he was having the toe and the bypass, right?
Yeah, he was in the regular patient rooms. I believe he was on 7 Tower.
I want to just a few more questions about do you remember conversations with the chaplain as well the night of your father's passing?
I remember 2 chaplains spoke to me. One was in the emergency room, and then one was up in the ICU.
After you had the conversation with Dr. Husel where he gave you an overview of your father's condition, you as a family had an opportunity to gather.
Yes, that was later in the evening.
And I think you said you prayed together.
Yes.
Was the chaplain present for that, or was the family just...
No, we were in a small quiet room off the side. I believe they call it a quiet room.
I want to talk just a few questions about that quiet room. Was that off the waiting room?
No, it was behind the nurse's station.
So on that 4th floor there, there's that big nursing station. It was behind there.
Yes.
Was that room made available openly to you, given that you had someone on the ICU?
I believe someone asked if there was a place that we could meet, and they offered that room to us.
sorry. And just a few more questions with respect to your family. I remember in the deposition that you talked about the decision that was made to palliatively extubate your father was a decision that was made by, quote, the family. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
And that your mother and your family was clear that your father would not want to be on a ventilator.
We believe that he would not want to live long-term on a ventilator.
And do you remember indicating that was in your deposition, that was unanimous, that everyone in the family agreed that your father would not want to live like that?
It wasn't unanimous at first. There was a few of us that were a little reserved about that because we kind of felt like it was a little hasty, that Dr. Husel was kind of making that decision a little too soon for us. But the consensus was generally that my father wouldn't want to live, again, long-term on any type of machines. And that's when we decided to put him in God's hands.
And you said hasty. You never said that in your deposition, right? That Dr. Husel was being hasty with the decision. Right.
I must not have been asked.
In terms of what you weren't asked then, let me ask you this. You know that the only person that can make the decision with respect to a palliative extubation is the next of kin or the durable power of attorney, right?
I'm not sure how that works, but it sounds like probably the doctor would want our advice on that.
Well, you gave the change in status, right? And the families.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I had the legal authority. I think that fell to my stepmother, since she was, his wife.
And so the authority wasn't with you then?
No, it wasn't with me.
The lawsuit that was filed, that's still pending?
Yes.
I know you indicated it seems to be that you, in some senses, a doctor tells you something and then you trust the doctor unless you have information otherwise. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, generally I believe what a doctor tells me.
So I want to go to the phone call that Mount Carmel made to you.
Okay.
Do you remember that call with Dr. Brady, do you not?
Yes. First I was contacted by Gina Mathias, which was, I guess, the patient liaison, and she set up the conversation with Dr. Brady.
And assuming at that point when Gina sets up the call, that's a call that you remember fairly clearly.
With Dr. Brady, yes.
And so, just talking about information and its accuracy, isn't it true that you were given information that your father received 8,000 micrograms of fentanyl?
Yes, Dr. Brady is the one that told me he was overdosed with 1,000 milligrams of fentanyl.
No, it wasn't 1,000, sir. Remember in your deposition when you said it was 8,000?
It was 1,000.
Let me get to it just a second here. Page 32. When you were asked, did Dr. Brady tell you that the fentanyl caused or accelerated your father's passing, you said, did you not? I don't recall exactly what he said, but he did tell me that it was 8,000 milligrams after I asked him how much fentanyl he had been given. Then do you remember saying that?
That must be a typo, because I remember distinctly that it was 1,000 milligrams.
Would it refresh your recollection? This is a certified copy of the transcript of the deposition. And wasn't your deposition also on video, sir?
Yeah, we were in the height of COVID at that point, so it was part of it was Zoom and some of it was in person.
Okay, so there was the court reporter that you were aware during the deposition, and then also there was a video component that was recording as well. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so your testimony is that that would just be an inaccuracy.
The 8,000 would be inaccurate.
And then it was after that conversation that you filed the lawsuit, or that you and your family filed the lawsuit?
We had filed the lawsuit prior to that deposition.
No, the call to Mount Carmel.
Oh, it wasn't immediately afterwards, no. We attempted to settle. They had I set up a...
Settlement talks, things like that, I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay. Disregard any comment on settlement? That's not part of this? Ms. Menashe, next
Yes.
question.
One last question, please. Just want to talk about when you said that your father seemed fine or stable when he got to the ICU. You remembered, you not, page 60 of his deposition, that how you were asked, did you know that in the emergency room after those arrests, so before he even goes to ICU, he's critically ill? And you indicated, did you not? I mean, it was apparent he was critically ill. Remember saying that?
Again, I know when someone goes to the ICU, they're not doing well.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
Redirect.
Do you recall just being asked about asking Dr. Husel, is he going to be in any pain? Do you remember that question?
Yes.
Just now. Had your father, up to that point, to you or to anyone that you saw, did your father appear to be in any type of pain prior to the extubation?
No.
Did he appear to be experiencing any anxiety at all?
No, and judging from the monitors, like I said, it looked like he was stable. You could see he had a rhythmic heartbeat, and his breathing seemed to be fairly normal, and he looked like he was asleep.
Did you or did anybody, to your knowledge in the family there, ask anybody there to give him any type of pain medication or anxiety medication?
No one did that.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay, you may step down. For the record, call your next witness.
For the record, Your Honor, the state of Ohio rests subject to the admission of our exhibits.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, as I explained to you yesterday, I've got some judge things to do. Okay, so I'm going to give you the rest of the day off. We're going to get started at 9 o'clock in the morning with the testimony. And with that, remember the admonition, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
All rise.
Have a good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you.
You may be seated. I assume you guys want a little bit of time to see what you want to do about the exhibits and that such? Or do you just want to jump right in on them?
I think we can jump into it, Judge, and get a lot.
Okay.
I don't think there'll be a lot of objections to some of this. What else did I use?
Okay, go. Let's take 2 minutes here just so that we can get it all together. Jeff, you want to come up? good to be a grandpa.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not old enough though.
How excited are you? Is this the first reference for you?
Same thing, whatever was shot to talk about.
Will they be posted?
It's more than this. They have another, they're expecting two.
Right. Oh my gosh.
We're only expecting one. Wow, let's be careful.